Chapter 1. The Inheritance. The letter arrived on a cold Thursday morning, smelling faintly of damp parchment and something older, like the air trapped inside tombs. It came wrapped in black ribbon, sealed with red wax, bearing the sigil of a raven perched on a key. No return address, no postage stamp. Edwin Merrick was still in his threadbare coat, sipping lukewarm coffee in his shoebox apartment in Baltimore when he slit the envelope open with a butter knife. Inside was a letter written in looping, old-fashioned script. The ink looked slightly smudged, as if the writer's hand had trembled, or as if time itself had tried to erase the message. To Edwin Merrick, the Merrick Estate is now under your name. As the last surviving bloodline of Alaric Merrick, you are summoned to Black Veil Hollow to claim your inheritance. The house awaits. Do not disturb the glass. Erasmus V. Hollow, executor of the Merrick Trust. At first, Edwin thought it was a joke. He had no family to speak of. His mother had died when he was a boy, and he'd never known his father. Foster homes, social workers, cheap jobs, nights filled with sirens and silence. Nothing about his life suggested he was the heir to anything but debt. And yet, there it was. A deed, a map, a train ticket, a house, his house, apparently, somewhere up in the hills of Massachusetts, in a place he'd never heard of, Black Veil Hollow. The journey. He left the next day. The train to Black Veil was half empty, and the farther north it went, the stranger the passengers became. They dressed in outdated coats, spoke in whispers, and stared at Edwin with a strange, distant recognition, as if they'd seen him before, as if they'd been expecting him. A storm rolled in as he neared the village. Lightning cracked over twisted trees. The hills rose like slumbering beasts beneath the fog. The last conductor, a pale, expressionless man with yellowed eyes, gave him a note as he stepped off the train. The house knows you now. It wasn't signed. The arrival. Black Veil Hollow was barely a town. A gas lamp flickered beside the station. A single cobblestone road twisted into the mist. The people watched him from behind curtains, shadows moving inside crooked houses. An old carriage, an actual horse-drawn carriage, waited for him at the road's end. No driver in sight, just a folded note tucked into the worn leather seat. To Merrick House. The horses moved without command. The ride up the hill was silent, except for the wind moaning through dead trees and the rhythmic clop of hooves on stone. And then, rising from the fog like a cathedral built by madmen, the Merrick Estate appeared. The house. It was massive. Gothic spires clawed at the sky. Windows like black eyes dotted the facade. Ivy curled around stone like veins. There was something unnatural about the angles. Some corners looked too sharp, others too soft, as if the house breathed. The front door creaked open before he touched it. Inside it smelled of dust, candle wax, and old wood. Paintings lined the walls, grim ancestors in mourning clothes, all with similar faces. The eyes followed him. A grand staircase curved upward like a snake frozen mid-slither. Every board beneath his feet groaned like it hadn't been stepped on in decades. A tall man in a faded black suit stood in the foyer. Thin as bone, his skin was so pale it almost glowed. "Mr. Merrick," he said with a bow, "I am Erasmus Hollow. Your late uncle Alaric left the estate in your name. Welcome home." "Uncle?" Edwin asked. "By blood, not by bond," Erasmus replied cryptically. "The Merrick line is old, very old. The records are incomplete, but the house remembers." Edwin was shown to a guest room. Canopy bed, lace curtains, an ancient grandfather clock that ticked backward. Erasmus said dinner would be served at sundown. There were no other staff. As Edwin unpacked, a peculiar draught moved through the room, although the windows were shut tight. He looked around, and that's when he saw it. A painting on the far wall. Not one of the ancestors, this one was different, abstract, chaotic. It showed a vast circular room with a floor made entirely of glass. Beneath the glass were shadows, unmoving but coiled like they were waiting. In the center of the room stood a single figure in a black cloak, staring down into the floor, watching something or being watched. Whispers of the watcher. Dinner was quiet. Erasmus served blood-red wine and cold roast beef and avoided all questions. "What's beneath the glass?" Edwin finally asked. The butler paused. The knife froze in his hand. "You've seen it already," he said softly. "The painting." "Yes." "There is a room in this house, Mr. Merrick," Erasmus said. "A room your ancestors built, but never entered willingly. It is not locked, but it is closed." "Why?" "Because the thing beneath the glass watches." Edwin laughed nervously. "A ghost?" "No." Erasmus's eyes were dead serious. "A prisoner. Or perhaps a god. The truth depends on who you ask." He stood. "You may explore the house, but if you value your soul, Mr. Merrick, do not enter the study. Do not look beneath the glass, and for the love of whatever you hold holy, never speak to it." And with that, Erasmus left. That night, the storm thickened. Thunder rattled the windows. Somewhere deep in the house, a piano played a note, just one. Then silence. Edwin couldn't sleep. He wandered the halls by candlelight. The mansion was bigger than it looked. Corridors twisted in impossible directions. He passed rooms filled with covered furniture, locked trunks, shattered mirrors. Then he found the door. It was old, darker than the others, carved with a strange symbol, a triangle with a single eye in its center. Cold air leaked from the crack beneath. No lock, just a handle. He reached out just to touch it. The door pulsed. He stumbled back, heart racing. And in that moment, through the keyhole, he saw it. Glass. A massive floor of glass. And beneath it, a shape, not quite human, not quite real, just watching. That night, Edwin dreamed he was standing on the glass, alone. Below, the shape shifted, slithered, then looked up. No eyes, no face, just awareness. It whispered, "Welcome home, child of the bloodline. You see me now, and soon I will see through you." End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Dust and Echoes. When Edwin awoke, the storm had passed, but the air still felt heavy, not with moisture, but with something deeper, like a memory clinging to the walls, whispering through the halls. The house was too quiet. He opened the window. Bog rolled across the land like a living thing, swallowing the trees in its path. The sun was trying to rise, but only a dim, coppery light filtered through the mist. Erasmus was nowhere to be seen. Still half dreaming, Edwin wandered the halls again. This time, he carried a notebook. He didn't know why, just that it felt necessary. A strange compulsion had begun to nest in his mind. Observe, record, remember. In the master bedroom, he found a drawer that had been jammed shut with age. He forced it open and found a letter wrapped in faded blue ribbon. The paper was brittle and yellowed. It read, "To whomever bears the name Merrick, you are not the first, nor will you be the last. The watcher beneath the glass is not a curse. It is a mirror. It shows us what we cannot face. Our own design." Alaric thought himself the jailer. He was wrong. Beware the glass, but more importantly, beware yourself. H. No surname, no date. The handwriting was jagged, almost feverish. Edwin tucked it into his pocket and continued. The Library of Ash. He found the house's library behind a door, disguised as a bookshelf. The room was circular, with high vaulted ceilings and hundreds of books, many crumbling with age. Dust coated everything like frost. But strangest of all, some of the books had no titles, just blank covers, no authors, no dates. He opened one. The pages were filled with symbols, circles within circles, strange constellations, spiraling diagrams that hurt his eyes to look at. Some pages bled into each other as if the ink had shifted over time, trying to rewrite itself. And on the last page of the first book, a single phrase was scrawled in English. "The gate breathes beneath your bloodline." The cracked portrait back in the hallway. Edwin noticed something he hadn't before. One of the ancestor portraits had changed. He was sure of it. It now had a crack running across the glass, slicing through the painted face like a wound. And more disturbingly, the figure's eyes, once dull and indifferent, now glared with intensity. The nameplate read, "Hiram Merrick, Keeper of the Threshold, 1801. There was no date of death. Something about that gaze made Edwin flinch. It felt knowing, alive. He reached up to touch the glass, and the eye in the painting blinked. Just once, he staggered backward, breath caught in his throat. But when he looked again, the eye was still, painted, unmoving, and yet he could feel it watching. The Diary of Alaric Merrick. That night, Erasmus returned. "I found a letter," Edwin said. "Signed H. Who was he?" The butler hesitated.
"Hiram Merrick, your great-great-grandfather, the one who built the study."
"And what about Alaric?" Erasmus looked down.
"His son, your uncle. He was the last to truly engage with the glass. He kept a diary. It may still be in the study."
"The one I'm not supposed to enter."
"The one you already dream about."
Erasmus replied without flinching. There was no use pretending. Erasmus led him to the study door, but did not open it.
"I will leave you here, Mr. Merrick. Some doors must be opened by blood."
And he vanished into the house. Inside the study, the door was colder than before. When Edwin turned the handle, it didn't creak. It signs. The room beyond was not just a study. It was a chamber, circular, with shelves that climbed into darkness, and books bound in cracked leather, stitched hides, and one breathed ever so slightly. But it was the floor that froze him. Glass. Thick. Pristine. Transparent as air. Beneath it, the floor of the estate vanished. And far, far below, something moved. Not quickly, not obviously, but subtly, like a shadow behind another shadow. Something enormous, ancient and patient. It didn't rise, it simply watched. Edwin stepped onto the glass. Nothing happened. He walked to the desk in the center, a heavy mahogany thing covered in dust. And there it was, the diary of Alaric Merrick. The first few pages were dry, methodical. Alaric had been an academic, a scholar, obsessed with the threshold between realms. He believed the house sat on a point of spiritual fracture, where time and dimension frayed. Entry 47. It stares, always. The more I study it, the more I feel my thoughts being pulled apart and reorganized. It does not speak in words. It breathes ideas into my dreams. Entry 82. I thought it was a prisoner, but now I suspect it allowed itself to be kept. Entry 101. Hiram was wrong. He did not build a prison. He built a mirror. I do not see the watcher's face. I see my own. Entry 112. If I vanish, know this. The watcher is not the danger. But there, open the glass. He was never meant to be locked away. We remember the truth you've forgotten. Edwin curled into bed, sweat-soaked, heart racing. But as he drifted into sleep, he knew he would return to the study, and soon he would speak to the Watcher. End of Chapter 2.
Chapter 3. The Glass Room. The next morning brought no sun, just the same rust-colored light leaking through the clouds as if dawn were being filtered through bloodied water. The fog still clung to the windows, thicker now, pressing against the glass like something trying to seep inside. The clocks had not resumed, each one. On the walls, the mantelpieces, the great-grandfather in the hall remained frozen at 3:03. Return to the study. Edwin returned to the study, candle in hand. He didn't remember deciding to go, only that his feet moved of their own accord, drawn down the crooked corridors past the cracked portrait of Hiram Merrick, whose eyes now looked more alive than paint should allow. The door opened before he touched it. The air inside was colder than it should have been, and yet still, calm like a temple buried in the earth. He stepped again onto the glass floor, and this time it felt thinner somehow, not weaker, just more present. The barrier between him and what lay below had become perceptible in a way glass shouldn't be, like it had weight, intention. He looked down. The thing below was there again, not moving, not clearly formed, just a mass, shifting subtly, as though composed of shadows and limbs that didn't follow human geometry. It pulsed in rhythm with something. His heartbeat, the presence beneath. He knelt, placing his palm flat against the glass. Cold, not dead cold, aware cold. The moment his skin touched it, something shifted in the room. It wasn't sound, not quite, but he heard it, a voice inside his thoughts. Now you look. Edwin stumbled back, heart hammering. His candle flickered violently, then steadied. The thing below had moved. Not much. Just enough to be noticed. Now it was closer to the surface. It hadn't risen. The glass had sunk. A second floor that shouldn't exist. Something caught his eye, a door on the far wall. He could have sworn it hadn't been there before. It was small, arched, and carved with symbols that hurt to stare at, like looking into static, or remembering a word that never existed. He opened it. A narrow spiral staircase wound downward. Impossible. There was no beneath to the study. He knew the mansion's layout. The study sat above the foundation, and yet he descended. The room of shadows. The staircase opened into a chamber made entirely of black stone. It had no torches, but it was lit. The light came from the walls themselves, dull and gray, like the glow of dying coals. In the center, a pedestal. On it, a mirror. Not glass, not silver. It looked like polished obsidian, but it shimmered. Contact the mirror darkened, then bloomed with light. Symbols raced across its surface. circles within spirals, veins of crimson and gold, fractal geometry that defied logic. And with it came the voice again. The bloodline was bound. The pact was sealed. You walk the threshold now. Edwin backed away. What are you? He whispered aloud. I am what you buried, what your ancestors feared, the knowledge they sealed beneath glass and prayer. But you will not run. The symbols stopped, and in their place a single word appeared on the surface of the mirror. Speak. The first word. He didn't know how he knew it, but a word rose to his lips, one he'd never heard before, yet felt older than fire. Thal the Kara. The room shuddered. The mirror cracked. Not shattered, just one fracture. One hairline split across its surface. From the crack a soft whisper escaped. Not words, not sound, but memory. Edwin suddenly remembered things that weren't his. A man in a long red coat, drawing glyphs in ash on the floor. A woman screaming into the glass as the watcher rose. A hand, his own hand, holding a silver key and weeping with guilt. And a voice. It must not awaken in full. You will regret knowing. Back to the surface he ran, up the stairs, through the arched door, back onto the glass floor, but something had changed. The shelves in the study had rearranged. Books were open now, floating, pages turning on their own, and the watcher, now fully visible beneath the floor, was not dormant. It pulsed with intelligence, with anticipation, as if it knew what Edwin had said, and approved. Erasmus speaks. That night, Edwin found Erasmus waiting in his room, standing motionless in the dark. You spoke the word, the butler said flatly. How do you know? The house listens. It always has. What happens now? Erasmus didn't blink. You begin to see. The real map. Erasmus handed him a folded piece of parchment, older than anything else in the house. A map, but not of the mansion, of the grounds beneath them. Rooms that weren't supposed to exist. Chambers buried beneath chambers. A spiral of halls leading downward, not into earth, but into something deeper. At the very bottom, a symbol. A mirror within a mirror, surrounded by 6 eyes. Edwin stared at it, hand trembling. What is this? He asked. Erasmus turned to leave, the place where the watcher was first born, and then with a whisper. Chapter 4. The Portrait That Watches. The fog did not lift. By now, Edwin stopped expecting sunlight. Days and nights bled into one another like bruises. Time no longer felt like a line. It curved, looped, throbbed. He ate when he remembered, slept when his body gave out, dreamed when the house allowed it. But the dreams weren't his anymore. They were becoming memories. The painted hall. The west wing of the mansion was colder, quieter, and always unlit. The corridor there was lined with large portraits, dozens of Merrick ancestors, dressed in mourning black, clutching books, candles, or symbols Edwin didn't recognize. They'd unsettled him before, but now they felt different, intimate. He stood before one in particular, a tall man with gray eyes and a face not unlike Edwin's own. The nameplate read, Lucian Merrick, Keeper of the 6th Hour. Below it, etched faintly in the frame, as if scratched with a blade, Time bends for the watcher. Edwin stared at the painting. Lucian stared back. There was a smear of shadow behind Lucian's head in the painting, a detail he hadn't noticed before, almost like a shape, something coiled, watching him. He leaned closer. The shadow moved. The change. That night, Edwin passed the hallway again, and the portrait of Lucian Merrick had changed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The mouth had altered, smiling slightly now, crooked and cruel. And in the background, the shadow behind him had grown. It now resembled a hand, or a tendril, reaching for Lucian's shoulder. He walked down the corridor to check the other paintings, one by one. They had changed too, some subtly. A hand in a different place. A curtain pulled back, eyes gazing in a new direction. Others more drastically. One ancestor, a woman named Isadora, now had her mouth open in a silent scream. Blood smeared the neckline of her dress. That hadn't been there yesterday, or had it? The last painting at the end of the hall stopped him cold. It had no nameplate. The figure was unfinished. A blank face half rendered. No eyes, no features. Just the suggestion of a man in shadow. Except for one detail. The coat. It was Edwin's coat. The one he was wearing at that very moment. The library revisited. Panicked, he returned to the library. He needed answers, history, pattern, proof that he wasn't losing his mind. He climbed the old ladder to the highest shelves, sections labeled in symbols, not words. He found a black ledger with gold clasps. The cracking self, he returned to the hall. This time, the blank-faced portrait was no longer blank. A faint outline of Edwin's jaw had been painted in. The shoulders were fuller. The eyes, still hollow, had shape now. Lashes, curves, color, but no pupils. He touched the canvas. It was still wet, freshly painted. And as he pulled his hand away, he noticed the faint smell of oil and turpentine. Someone was painting this, but who? The studio. The door to the north wing had always been locked, but now, as Edwin passed, it creaked open a few inches, enough to tempt. Inside he found what once must have been an artist's studio. Paints, brushes, a wooden easel, blank canvases stacked in the corners, and against the far wall, a canvas turned inward. He flicked it around. It was him, not as he was now, but as he would be. Older, hollow, worn, dressed in a long dark coat he'd never owned, standing not in the mansion, but on the glass, with the watcher fully risen beneath him. He recoiled. There was writing along the edge of the canvas, not painted, scratched in with something sharp. It remembers you before you remember your sight. The awakening. He awoke before dawn. His pillow was wet, not from sweat, from paint. Black oily streaks lined his neck and hairline. His fingertips were stained red, yellow, and gray. He hadn't painted anything. Had he? A knock at the door. Erasmus stood in the hallway, holding a covered canvas. He said nothing, just handed it over, bowed, and disappeared again. Edwin unwrapped it. It was the same painting from the studio, but now fully finished. He was no longer alone. The watcher stood beside him, towering, and both of them looked out at the viewer with the same empty eyes. And beneath the painting, etched in the wood frame, "Once the house paints you, there is no leaving." End of chapter 4. Whispers in the walls. Edwin could no longer tell when he was awake and when he was dreaming. The house made no distinction. He woke not to silence, but to breath, not his own. A slow-drawn inhalation from somewhere inside the walls, like someone on the other side, listening close. And then, and when? A whisper, deliberate, familiar, but wrong. He sat up. The room was dark, though the window showed pale gray morning. The walls trembled ever so slightly, not violently, rhythmically, like a heartbeat or chanting. He pressed his ear to the floor. More whispers. Too many voices to count, layered, echoed, and one repeated over and over. You must decide what to remember. He wandered the hallways, candle in hand, tracing the walls with his fingertips. The wallpaper felt softer today, moist, almost pulsing. He passed the portrait hall again. Every painting had changed. Lucian Merrick now stood with his back turned, as if refusing to look at Edwin. Isadora's mouth was sewn shut, in thick red strokes of paint, and Edwin's own unfinished portrait, nearly complete. Only the eyes remained blank. In the western hall stood a broken grandfather clock, forever frozen at 3:03. On impulse, Edwin removed the brass faceplate. Behind it, a hole, not a mechanical cavity, a passage, just wide enough to crawl through. It led into the wall, black as ink, dry but lined with wooden ribs like the inside of a coffin. The whispers grew louder here, hissing, murmuring, overlapping like 1,000 voices praying in reverse. You opened the mirror. You cracked the seal. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. He crawled in. The passage narrowed and twisted. It shouldn't have extended so far. It should have ended at the next room, but the walls spiraled, turned, sloped downward. After what felt like hours, Edwin found a door, a mirror set into the wall, tarnished, with cracks radiating from the center. But this mirror didn't show his reflection. It showed his childhood bedroom in Baltimore. Cheap furniture, faded posters, a version of himself, young, scared, staring out a window. Behind child Edwin, a tall, dark shape stood silently, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. The watcher, watching him before he'd ever known it existed. The confessional room. The path ended in a circular crawlspace, smooth stone, black walls, and carvings etched into every surface. It smelled like salt and rust. There was a wooden chair in the center, facing the wall, and on the wall a sentence carved in deep gouges. Confess what you know. He sat. He didn't want to, but his body lowered itself into the chair like it had done so before. The air grew thick. The walls shimmered. And then a voice behind him. What did you see when you looked into the glass? He tried to speak, but his throat locked. His mouth moved, and yet the words echoed around the room before he could say them. I saw myself standing beside it, not in fear, in unity. Have you dreamed of wearing its form? Yes. Have you let it speak through you? No, but that was a lie. Do you want it to be free? A pause, then. Yes. The voices of the ancestors. When he exited the walls, the house had changed again. The air was denser, every room darker, every portrait watching. But now they spoke. Not aloud, inside his mind. We were fools. We thought ourselves its jailers. It let us build its prison so it could enter our bloodline. You are the last. You are the door. Edwin collapsed in the hallway, clutching his temples. His head throbbed with overlapping memories. He saw Lucian slicing his own eyes out with a shard of glass, Isadora being dragged across the floor screaming as something pulled her toward the mirror, Alaric chanting the name Thalvekhara until his body split in two. And one final memory that was not his own but still felt like it belonged to him. Hiram Merrick in the glass room, whispering, "You cannot kill a god you invited in through your blood." The map revisited. He pulled the map Erasmus had given him from under his mattress. The spiral beneath the estate, the rooms hidden in impossible geometry. And at the center, the Eye of Six, the point from which all lines radiated. There was a phrase he hadn't noticed before, faint, written in tiny, curling script. The watcher sees clearest through silence. He turned the map over. The back was blank. Until he held it over the candle, invisible ink flared into visibility, a new chamber, a forgotten room. Labeled simply, "The Heart." Erasmus returns. Edwin found Erasmus standing at the base of the staircase, holding a box wrapped in black cloth. "I heard them," Edwin said. "I know. They're in the walls. They're in me." Erasmus nodded. "They always have been."
Your blood remembers what your mind rejects. What is the heart?
Erasmus didn't answer right away. Then, "It is where your family first made the pact, where the mirror was born, where it entered this world." He handed Edwin the box. Inside, a long, rusted key and a strip of black silk, "for when you must cover your eyes," Erasmus said. "Some truths are best glimpsed blind." That night, Edwin didn't sleep. He sat in the study. He stared down into the glass. The watcher stirred beneath him, no longer coiled but rising slowly, like mist taking shape. It did not speak. It didn't need to, because now he heard the voices. Not from the house, from inside himself, not in English, not in any tongue he recognized, but he understood them. "You have walked the path of the blood. Soon you will be the gate." And then a crack, the glass beneath his feet, the tiniest fracture, not across the surface, but within it, as if something inside were pushing upward. And as the candlelight flickered in that moment of perfect silence, Edwin saw it. His reflection in the glass blinked. But he hadn't. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Mirror in the Attic. The attic had no stairway. It could only be reached by a pull-chain ladder tucked in a corner of the east wing, half-rotted, near-forgotten, shrouded by moth-eaten drapes. Edwin hadn't noticed it before. But this morning, after the whispering walls and the crack in the glass, something in the house changed. The ladder hung down on its own, waiting. The climb dust rained as Edwin ascended, coughing as centuries of silence shook free. The wood moaned underfoot, old and brittle. Light bled through the floorboards from below, but above, the attic held only shadows. It wasn't empty. It wasn't dark either. It was gray. The air had no weight, no sound. Even the candle Edwin carried didn't flicker. The flame bent, curved, obeyed some different law here. And in the center of the attic stood the mirror. The mirror, 7 feet tall, ornate iron frame, curling like serpents around its edges. Dusty, but not cracked like the others. This mirror was clean, pristine, as if it had been waiting to be seen. There was no reflection in it at first, just a deep silver sheen that shimmered like liquid mercury. Then the mirror began to change, slowly, and it showed Edwin not as he was, but as he would be, the future reflection. He stood before it, older, yes, but not merely aged, altered. his skin pale, almost translucent, veins like dark rivers beneath the surface. His eyes were black, bottomless. Around his neck, a chain of glass keys. In one hand, a book made of stretched leather. In the other, nothing. But his shadow moved on its own, and behind his reflection, the watcher, no longer beneath the glass, standing beside him, towering, limbs curling protectively around Edwin's shoulders like a lover or a priest. They did not touch, but they were one. The reflection smiled, not with joy, with knowing, the voice in the mirror. Then the mirror spoke. No mouth, no sound. But the voice entered Edwin's mind. You have always been this. He tried to speak, but the mirror spoke again. You did not find the Watcher. You were its vessel before you were born. The bloodline was not cursed, it was forged. The moment you see what you will become, you have already begun. He turned away, but the mirror followed him. Its reflection shifted to match every angle, even when he turned his back. The glass showed his face, staring over his shoulder, always watching, just like the portraits, just like the house, just like it. Marks. He stumbled down from the attic into the bathroom and pulled off his shirt. His chest had begun to itch in the night. Now he saw why. There were symbols etched into his skin, faint like watermarks, but they shimmered when he moved. Spirals, keys, eyes. One over his heart looked exactly like the eye of 6 on the map. He scrubbed, clawed, bled, but the marks would not fade. They had not been drawn, they had been revealed. The journal continues. He returned to Alaric's journal, flipping to the final pages. New entries were there, written in his own handwriting, but he hadn't written them. Entry 138. The mirror knows more than the glass. The attic is not above, it is before. All time folds in the reflection. It showed me the house as it was before it was built. Entry 139. I saw myself as the Watcher sees me. A door with legs, a gate with skin. My voice no longer echoes in my ears, it echoes in the walls. Entry 140. When the eyes are complete in the painting, it will be too late to turn back. I feel them watching, waiting to blink. The final line was scrawled in shaky ink. I fear the house has painted my mind. The spiral staircase appears. That evening, while pacing the west corridor, Edwin heard a new sound, the chiming of a bell. Once low, hollow, like the sound of metal underwater. He followed it through rooms that hadn't been there before. Passageways that rearranged themselves behind him. Doors that opened into corridors and closed into walls. Then he saw it, a spiral staircase of stone, leading down, far below the foundation. It matched the map. This was the way to the heart, but something stopped him. A whisper from the attic above. One last message from the mirror. Once you step below, there is no more pretending. The house will no longer hide your reflection. The final change in the portrait. He rushed back to the portrait hall. His own painting was finished, completely. Eyes painted, staring, alive, and worse. He could feel them behind his skull. The same eyes, same depth. And as he stared into his painted gaze, the lips in the portrait curled. And the painted Edwin whispered, "We are ready." End of Chapter 6.
Chapter 7. The Crawling Hour. Midnight came and never left. The clocks ticked, the gears turned, but the hands did not move. 12 o'clock. Endless, an hour stretched like skin over bone, thin, trembling, impossible. A time that shouldn't exist, unfolding itself over the house like a veil. The sky outside didn't change, neither moon nor stars, just stillness. And Edwin, sitting in the study, felt it. The pause in the world, the moment when all things that pretended to be real took off their masks. The ancestors' rise. He first heard it in the hall, the sound of bare feet on old wood, not walking, dragging. He stepped into the corridor and nearly dropped his candle. Lucian Merrick stood at the far end, shirt open, eyeless sockets weeping black resin, hands twitching. Behind him came Isadora, her mouth still sewn shut, fingers tracing symbols in the air. And Alaric, body split at the chest, yet walking. None spoke, they simply moved, toward the study, toward him. The portraits had emptied, the paint had peeled itself free. Now they walked. They do not see you. He pressed himself against the wall as they passed. They didn't look at him, didn't speak, didn't move with urgency, just followed, a pull, toward the glass room. Edwin followed, not because he wanted to, because he had to. The chant of the crawling hour. Inside the study, the ancestors formed a circle around the glass floor. Their mouths moved, not in speech but in rhythm. A chant, low, uneven, not human in its cadence. Vekara, Thal, Merrick Tal, Ignai. Vekara, Thal, Merrick Tal, Ignai. The words crawled across Edwin's spine like spiders. He knew them, not from memory, but from blood. These were the names of the Watcher. And now the Watcher stirred. Beneath the glass, its shape grew clearer, still faceless, still wrong, but no longer passive. Now it listened. The voice that wasn't his. When Edwin tried to speak, it wasn't his voice that came out. His lips moved, but the sound was not him. I remember what the blood forgot. I remember the pact beneath the seventh moon. I am the last door. The ancestors knelt. They did not look at Edwin. They looked past him, through him, as if the Watcher were speaking from his body, as if Edwin were no longer alone inside himself. The room beneath the room. Then the glass cracked, again, not shattered, but broken in a perfect circle, like a seal. The glass slid open without a sound, revealing a staircase made of obsidian spiraling downward. Not into stone, not into earth, into blackness. The crawling hour opened its path, and Edwin stepped in. The descent. He descended without a candle. There was no need. The walls glowed faintly, not with light, with memory. As he moved, they displayed images, moving images, scenes from the past, from the Merricks. He saw Hiram carving the first symbols into the mirror frame, Lucian whispering to shadows that grew from the fireplace, Isadora feeding the house with something in a jar that squirmed, and Alaric weeping in front of the Watcher, screaming, "Show me the truth! Show me what I am!" And the Watcher answered. Edwin saw it all, not as a witness, as if he'd done it himself. The door of the heart. At the end of the stairwell stood a massive door, six-eyed, carved into a living wall of pulsating flesh and stone. It breathed, a keyhole at its center. The key Erasmus gave him burned in his pocket now, so hot it left a mark on his thigh. He took it out, hand trembling. As he brought it near, the wall moaned. Not pain, anticipation. He turned the key. The door opened like a wound. Inside the heart. The chamber was circular, cathedral high. The walls were veins, the ceiling endless. And in the center, the heart. Not an organ, not in any human sense. It was a mirror, floating, rotating, six-sided, each pane showing a different version of Edwin, one rotting, one crowned, one screaming in flame, one dissolving into shadow, one merged with the Watcher, one missing entirely. The final pane was empty, waiting, and a voice, louder now, rippled through the chamber. Choose the form, choose what you become. You cannot walk back once you are known. The final pull. Edwin tried to run, but the mirrors turned faster. They reflected not his body, but his soul. All the paths he could walk, all the things the Watcher could make him. And then, he heard the childhood version of himself, whispering, "You already chose, the moment you looked." The final pane filled with light. and Edwin, unable to look away, stepped forward, into the glass. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8, The Becoming. The mirror did not shatter. It absorbed. There was no sensation of passing through, no rupture, no pain. One breath, he stood before it. The next, he was inside. Inside what? Not a reflection, not a memory, not a dream. Something older than all of them. A place where meaning unraveled. The other side. The world had no color here, only gradients of gray, etched like charcoal against a dying canvas. The air was thick and silent, not like fog, like absence. Edwin stood on a vast plain made entirely of mirrors. Shattered, curved, broken, yet solid underfoot. Each shard reflected a version of him, wrong in some way. One with the watcher's eyes. One with a keyhole in his chest. One weeping black tears. One laughing, mouth filled with glass. He tried to move, but the world shifted first. The time before time skies pulsed above him, veins of starlight forming constellations he somehow recognized, and in the distance, something crawled across the horizon. Not a creature, a temple, not built, born. It moved like an animal, limbs of architecture folding across its own body, trailing spires like legs, and atop it, a great disk spun, glass reflecting the stars in reverse. Edwin knew this place. Not in words, in blood. This was before the house, before the Merricks, before time as he knew it. This was where the Watcher had first entered, the Watcher unveiled. And then it came. Not suddenly, not violently. It emerged, the way dreams leak into consciousness. A form, if one could call it that, rose beside him. 7 limbs. Skin like the edge of a memory. No face, only a depthless void. And in that void stars blinked like dying thoughts. It did not speak. It did not move. It simply was. And Edwin, no longer just Edwin, understood. The revelation the Watcher had never been trapped. It had never been locked beneath glass. The mirror was not a prison. The glass was not a barrier. They were channels, conduits. Through them, it could touch minds, shape generations, reshape history. The Merrick bloodline had not built a seal. They had built a lens, a way to focus the cosmic thing upon a single, chosen host, him. The becoming begins. The temple reached him, its limbs unfolding to form walls, its tower opening like a mouth. And Edwin stepped inside. Every surface showed him again, but now the reflections whispered. Each word peeled back a part of his self. You are the gate. You are the final key. The house was only your cradle. You must become the I. His body did not resist. His mind did, but too late. The whispers became commands, and the commands became truth. Inside the final room. The temple's heart was a room made of spiraling glass. In the center stood a mirror with no reflection. Instead, it showed all of time. Moments from the Merrick's lives flickered across its surface. Hiram drawing the first circle. Lucian cutting out his eyes. Isadora swallowed by the mirror. Erasmus, younger, burning letters he was forbidden to read. And then, Edwin's future. Walking barefoot through the mansion, eyes gone black, speaking in tongues to the paintings, writing new rules into the floorboards, and finally, opening the gate, the binding. As he stared, a mark appeared on his chest, the final sigil. It glowed, black light coiling out like smoke. The 6-eyed symbol from the map, the last piece. The Watcher moved behind him now. He could feel it, not as a weight, but as a second heart, a second mind, a second self. There is no before now. You have always been here. You will walk in the world again, and they will call you human. But you will remember this place. You will build the mirror again. The return. He awoke on the study floor. The glass was whole again, but his chest still bore the mark. The painting of him in the hall was gone, replaced by a blank canvas, waiting. He stood slowly. The house breathed with him. Every step echoed through it like a command, and from the far corridor came Erasmus, older now, or perhaps just revealed. He knelt without a word and offered Edwin a key, but not to a door, to the world. A key of bone, wrapped in silver thread. "You've returned," Erasmus whispered. Edwin looked at his hands. They no longer trembled. The mirror walks. That night, the mirrors in every room began to shift, not crack, turn, all at once, as if pivoting toward him, and each reflected a different version of Edwin, not memory, potential. He walked past each one, silent, until he reached the mirror in the attic, now black as obsidian, and inside it, the watcher blinked. Once, slow, and Edwin blinked back. Together. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The New Reflection. The following morning came without sun. Light seeped into the mansion from no discernible source. The shadows no longer followed logic. Some curved against walls, others hovered in corners as if waiting to be seen. Edwin stood in front of the mirror in the foyer. This mirror did not show the room behind him. It showed something else, a black sky, a house not of wood or stone, but made of limbs and whispers, a version of him standing on a spire, arms raised, chanting, and behind him the watcher, wearing his face. He touched the glass. It felt like skin. At noon, for the first time in weeks, someone knocked on the front door. A heavy, deliberate knock, 3 times. Erasmus appeared silently at Edwin's side. "You should not answer," he said. "Why?" "Because they still believe you are human." Edwin opened the door anyway. Outside stood 2 people, a woman in a long gray coat, sharp eyes, a journalist's notebook in hand, a young man with nervous hands and a tape recorder. "Mr. Merrick?" the woman asked. "I'm Anne Calgrave, from the Miskatonic Review. You haven't responded to any of our letters." "I don't read letters anymore," Edwin said softly. She gave a tight smile. "May we come in?" He hesitated. The house did not resist. They sat in the parlor, though Edwin hadn't intended to lead them there. The room seemed to choose itself. Anne wasted no time. "We're compiling a family history of the Merrick Estate. Your lineage is fascinating. The records are fragmented, contradictory. Dates don't match. People appear and vanish. The official town registry lists this house as abandoned since 1893. Edwin said nothing. The young man hit record. Anne leaned forward. "There's a local legend that the house rewrites its owners, that none of the Merricks who moved in ever returned unchanged." He smiled faintly. "Do you believe in mirrors?" She blinked. "Pardon." "Not reflections, mirrors, things that open, things that remember." Anne faltered, just slightly. The house shifted. The parlor's wallpaper peeled upward like it was listening. "I want to show you something," Edwin said. He stood and walked them through the hall of portraits. Anne gasped softly. They weren't like this when we arrived. Each painting now bore living detail, flesh-like texture, eyes that shimmered, some blinked. The young man whispered, "One of them just moved." "They all move," Edwin said, "but only when you look away." He turned to Anne. There was no curse, no madness, no haunting. He touched his own portrait, now complete. There was only invitation. And the canvas behind him sighed. The house reacts. Anne tried to leave, but the front door was gone. Where it had been, a tall mirror. It did not reflect them, it reflected a hallway with no end, filled with crawling shadows that clicked and whispered. The young man began to panic. He ran back toward the entrance. The mirror rippled and swallowed him. Silently. Anne screamed, but no sound escaped her throat. Edwin looked at her with calm. "You were not meant to come here," he said. "Not yet." Edwin's choice. The house gave him a choice. He felt it in his bones. Let her leave and the world remains unaware, or keep her and complete the cycle. He looked into the nearest mirror. His reflection tilted its head, not in confusion, in suggestion. The watcher did not speak, but Edwin felt the message. You do not have to become me, you can become us. There is still your voice to be used. He turned back to Anne, who backed into the portrait hall. The paintings watched her, hungry. The mirror room returns. He led her, silently, back to the study. The glass floor had changed again. Now it showed the void beneath, not the watcher's full form, but countless fragments of it. Eyes, mouths, coils, like puzzle pieces drifting in darkness. Anne's voice cracked. What is that? My inheritance, Edwin said. And what will it do to me? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened a journal, his own, and began to write. The house called her, not to consume, to witness. A mirror must be seen to reflect. He looked up. Anne was gone, but her reflection remained in the glass, staring, screaming, learning. The house grows. That night, a new wing appeared on the east side of the mansion. Erasmus confirmed it. A reflection takes space, he said. Edwin walked through it. New doors, new halls, new mirrors. Each one showing people he hadn't met yet. Journalists, neighbors, pilgrims. Each one approaching the house. Each one reflected as something else. Each one already changed. The final mirror. Edwin returned to the attic. The tall obsidian mirror was gone. In its place, a pane of living glass. It rippled when he approached. This time it showed no version of him, only the watcher, alone. And then the mirror spoke in his own voice. You are no longer watching. You are now the one being seen. The house pulsed, and Edwin smiled. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The House That Remembers. It began with the walls breathing in unison. Every room inhaled. The doors bowed inward like lungs. The floorboards flexed like ribs. And at the center of it all stood Edwin Merrick. No longer quite Edwin, not fully human, not entirely other. Something in between. The echoes return. The mirrors now spoke on their own, even when no one was near. At first soft. Do you remember the shape of the gate? What did you trade for your eyes? Where does the reflection end? Edwin walked the halls with ink-stained hands, writing names on the walls that no one had spoken in centuries. Some were Merrick's, others were not. Thalvikara, Egrith Nan, Watcher upon Glass. Erasmus no longer addressed him as Master Edwin. Now he only whispered, My Lord of Reflection. The estate expands. The house was growing, not being rebuilt, expanding. Outward, downward, inward. New staircases, new chambers, new mirrors. Some of them reflected cities he had never visited. Others reflected rooms that hadn't yet been built. One mirror showed a cathedral made of skin and bone, rising in a desert where no man had ever walked. Edwin stepped through that mirror once. He returned, covered in ash. The visitors disappear. They came one by one, a university historian, a psychic from Arkham, a distant cousin named Margaret, a priest from a southern chapel. None left, but none were seen again either. Their reflections remained, walking the house silently, serving. Some stood behind mirrors, some lived within paintings. One could be heard in the east wing, singing lullabies in a tongue with no vowels, the first whisper beyond the house. It happened in a cafe, 3 towns over. A child looked into a bathroom mirror and spoke 3 words. He is coming. She didn't remember doing it. Her parents didn't understand why her eyes bled afterward. News spread, not fast, not loudly, but Edwin felt it. The house had begun to push outward. The mirrors were no longer confined to Merrick walls. The mirror in the well. One night Erasmus led Edwin to the southern garden. There was a well there, sealed long ago. They opened it. Inside, a single mirror submerged in water. Its surface shimmered despite the lack of light. And when Edwin looked in, he saw himself, walking down a modern city street, dressed like any man, unseen by all. Behind him, the watcher moved in perfect rhythm. Every step they took, a shadow in the real world shifted. The town notices. Whispers spread through the village of Osgood's Hollow, that the Merrick house was watching, that people who went up the path returned changed, if they returned at all. One morning, an old woman left bread on Edwin's doorstep. The next day, her entire orchard had grown silver leaves. They never turned green again. By the end of the week, children refused to say the word mirror. By the end of the month, no one spoke the name Merrick. Edwin walks the town. He left the house on a quiet Thursday. No fog, no illusions. He simply walked into town. His shadow did not follow him. His footsteps made no sound. And yet people turned to look, not at him, behind him. Some fell to their knees. Some wept. Some smiled through bleeding eyes. When he passed by a window, the glass rippled, and inside the pane, 1,000 versions of himself watched back. The library that isn't. He entered the local library, not by door, by reflection. He touched the mirror in the restroom, stepped through. Inside, books fluttered open. Not paper, flesh. They spoke names aloud, names Edwin hadn't yet earned. One book whispered, "He who reflects the void." Another whispered, "The Watcher's tongue." The librarian never saw him, but she never read again after that day. The house writes back. When Edwin returned home, he found a new journal on his desk, bound in glass. The ink inside shimmered like oil. He hadn't written it, but every page bore his name, and on the final page,
"You are no longer inside the house, yet the house is now inside you."
The final mirror. One last door remained, a mirror taller than all the others, smooth as still water, colder than death, bordered by bone. It showed nothing, not darkness, not reflection, just absence. Erasmus stood behind him, trembling.
"You don't have to go through,"
he whispered. Edwin looked over his shoulder, smiled. "I already did," and stepped into it. Epilogue. The world watches. In the weeks that followed, reports surfaced around the world. A man with glass eyes speaking languages no one knew. Reflections that didn't match their owners. Mirrors turning black in hospitals, churches, government buildings. Children born with spiral-shaped birthmarks on their chests. Some say it's mass hysteria. Some say it's prophecy. But some, those who whisper in back rooms and burn journals under moonlight, know the truth. The watcher beneath the glass is no longer beneath anything. It walks among us, and it remembers. End of chapter 10. End of book 1.